Hello, my name is Kevin Morrison, and I'm the president and founder of Commercial Transportation Safety Associates, or CTSA. The mission of our company is to assist commercial transportation entities in compliant with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. The reason for this video, I want my clients and the industry in general to understand how they're being evaluated by the DOT today, and for them to understand how their actions and the actions of their drivers with regard to safety can affect the amount of revenue that can be generated by the company and really can make or break a company in today's environment. This is the first of a series of new videos that can serve as a virtual safety meeting for companies and their drivers. The way most companies are set up today, it's very difficult to get all of the drivers in the same place at the same time to have a safety meeting. But it's also very important for companies to communicate with their drivers on a regular basis and to provide them with the information that will help them be better drivers, which will ultimately allow the company to enjoy low safety scores, which is very important in today's industry. So this is the first of a series of these virtual safety meetings that I'll be putting together. And basically, it will be available to anybody who's a member of the Compliance Hub by CTSA. These videos are intended to provide the latest information on regulations, DOT initiatives that affect trucking companies and their drivers, and to clarify any rumors or misunderstandings regarding the federal safety regulations. So, a little about me. I spent 20 years with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, or the US DOT. While with FMCSA, I served as a safety investigator, a roadside inspector, and a program manager. I was second in charge of the FMCSA South Carolina division for several years at the end of my career. During the time that I was with the agency, I was recognized by the Secretary of Transportation for doing something that I really enjoy doing, which is helping small businesses, reach their full potential. I guarantee that anybody that watches this video or future videos will learn something that they didn't know, and you will receive information that will be beneficial to you for the rest of your career in the commercial transportation industry. So, let's get started by talking about CSA. I'm going to give a quick overview. So the US DOT, or the FMCSA under the US DOT, is charged with issuing the company's US DOT numbers and with ensuring that companies comply with the federal safety regulations. The FMCSA also issues operating authority to trucking and passenger carrying companies to operate in the United States. The mission of the FMCSA is to reduce crashes, injuries, and fatalities involving commercial motor vehicles. Notice I didn't say crashes, injuries, and fatalities caused by commercial motor vehicles, because the FMCSA, through studies that they've conducted, realizes that a lot of crashes involving commercial motor vehicles are actually caused by the smaller vehicle. The FMCSA is responsible for enforcing the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, or the FMCSR, and they're related to the following areas: the Commercial Driver's License Regulations, the Driver Qualification Regulations, regulations dealing with the maintenance of commercial vehicles, drug and alcohol testing requirements, hours of service, which are logs and ELDs, or electronic logging devices, insurance regulations, and accident management. So there are 850,000 roughly companies with DOT numbers in the United States, and about 5 million plus drivers with CDLs. So due to the size of the commercial transportation industry, the FMCSA requires help or enlists the help of state agencies to assist them enforcing the federal regulations. So the US DOT pays millions of dollars in grant funds to the states to assist them enforcing these regulations. They use that money for training, for salaries, to buy equipment and things such as that. And in return, they assist the agency enforcing the safety regulations, and they upload the data that they collect during roadside inspections and things like that to the FMCSA. So when a driver gets a roadside inspection in any state, that information is uploaded to the USDOT and is applied to the company under the company's USDOT number. So the FMCSA is always looking for more efficient and more effective ways to enforce the federal safety regulations, and they've enlisted and developed quite a bit of technology over the last 20 years to help them in that mission. A major change occurred in enforcement in 2010 when the FMCSA implemented CSA 2010. CSA stands for Compliance, Safety, and Accountability. The system, it evaluates a company's safety posture using a series of algorithms or mathematical formulas, but in the interest of time, I'm going to explain it in very basic terms. The premise of CSA is that you can tell if a trucking company's, if they have sufficient processes and policies in place to operate safely by the results of their roadside inspections. So, when a driver is selected for an inspection and a vehicle is selected for an inspection at a weigh station or on the roadside, each violation that is written has a predetermined severity weight represented by a numerical value between 1 and 10. To keep it simple, let's just say that each violation carries a point between 1 and 10. For example, not having an operator's manual for your ELD is 1 point. An inoperable tail light or a tail light that's not working, that's 6 points. And talking on the cell phone while you're operating a commercial motor vehicle is 10 points. If the driver or the vehicle is placed out of service for a violation, then 2 additional points are added to that violation's severity weight. So then the state uploads the violations or the inspections to the USDOT, and the USDOT attributes those inspections to the company that operates the vehicle and employs the driver in the form of numerical measures in 7 behavioral analysis and safety improvement categories, or basics. And we'll refer to those basics as we'll just call them safety categories, and we'll call the measures in each basic a score. So the 7 safety categories, 7 basics or safety categories are unsafe driving, crash indicator, hours of service compliance, vehicle maintenance, controlled substance and alcohol, hazardous materials, and driver fitness. So for unsafe driving, these are violations that basically consist of traffic citations, traffic violations. For example, speeding, following too close, not wearing a seatbelt, talking on the cell phone. All of these affect a company's unsafe driving basic. Crash indicator, is clear. It just reflects the number of crashes that a company and its drivers have been involved in over the last 3 years. Hours of service violations, and you have to forgive the computer, I keep getting a little chime there. I'm trying to figure out how to prevent that. But hours of service compliance basically deals with violations related to logs and to ELDs. Vehicle maintenance, any mechanical or load securement violation affects a company's vehicle maintenance score. Controlled substance and alcohol, again, self-explanatory. These are violations related to driving under the influence or having drugs or alcohol in the vehicles, including residue, paraphernalia, and open or unopened containers. Hazardous materials violations are violations of the federal hazardous material regulations when you're transporting hazmat. And finally, the driver fitness violations. These are violations that are primarily related to issues dealing with the medical certification and the CDL or driver's license. So each basic or safety category has a predetermined threshold that is set by the DOT, and when a company's score in a category crosses the threshold that the DOT has set for that category, the company gets an alert in that category, When a company gets an alert in 2 or more categories, now they go on a list for the DOT to conduct a compliance investigation on the company. The purpose of the compliance investigation is for the DOT to determine why the company is having such high scores in a particular area. If the company has 2 alerts in vehicle maintenance and hours of service, for example, then the FMCSA will conduct what's called a focus compliance investigation. And during a focus investigation, they basically just come in and review the 2 areas where the company is showing an alert on their record. So after after they review everything, they'll come in and they'll cite violations in those areas, and then they'll make recommendations on how to improve in those areas. So if the alerts, again, are in vehicle maintenance and hours of service, then the safety investigator will look at the company's processes, policies, and files related to those 2 areas. They'll cite violations against the company, as I stated, and the violation that they discover, and any violation that they discover, and they'll make recommendations for correcting that. If a company has alerts in 3 or more of those safety areas or basics, now the DOT is going to come in and they're going to conduct what's called a comprehensive compliance investigation. So after, first of all, during a comprehensive investigation, they're going to look at basically the whole operation. They're going to look at everything. So after the compliance review, the DOT can assign a company a safety rating based on the results of the review. The safety rating will be either satisfactory, conditional, or unsatisfactory. And depending on the type of operation, if a company gets an unsatisfactory proposed safety rating, they'll have 45 to 60 days to correct the deficiencies and, prove to the DOT that they've corrected the deficiencies, or the DOT will suspend or revoke their operating authority, their MC number, which means that the company will be essentially shut down. So if a company receives a conditional safety rating, they can continue to operate, but what they'll find very quickly is that with a conditional safety rating, a lot of their brokers will start backing away. They'll want to offer them the cheap freight or not offer them any freight at all, and their insurance company will immediately have a problem and want to raise the cost of their insurance even higher than what those rates are now. So in addition to granting the company a safety rating after a compliance review, the DOT can also write fines for anything, any serious violation that they discover during the compliance review. They can write a fine against the company. So just remember, as a driver, that all of this is triggered by the type of roadside inspections that you, the drivers, receive under the company's DOT number. So all of this data is recorded in the DOT Safety Management System, or SMS system. And this SMS report on every company is updated each month. And the report shows not only census data about the company. In other words, it'll show their name, address, phone numbers, fax numbers, DOT number, and all of that. But it will also list a lot of the safety data, associated with the company. For example, the SMS report shows how often the company is placed out of service on the roadside during a roadside inspection, and compares that to other companies in the country as far as how often they're being placed out of service. The SMS report shows the current safety rating, that they may have gotten during a compliance investigation. It shows the date, location of all roadside inspections that the companies had and the violations of all roadside inspections that the companies had in the last 24 months. All of that is publicly available. The current safety scores in the 7 basics are shown on the report, and violations cited during the DOT compliance investigation that the company may have had would also be visible. In addition, the report will show any fines that the company has been issued by the DOT. So under CSA, all of this information in the company's safety record is made available publicly, and that's by design. Why? Well, several years ago, the FMCSA established and they published 3 goals under their mission to make the highway safer. The DOT, the FMCSA stated that they wanted to, 1, raise the bar for entering the commercial transportation industry. 2, they wanted to increase the standards for remaining in the industry. And 3, they wanted to remove unsafe companies or unsafe operations from the industry. So to raise the bar for entering the industry, the FMCSA created the new entrant safety audit that every new company must pass once they come into business. Once you get your DOT number, you got to have a safety audit and pass it within within several months of getting your DOT number. To fulfill the intention of increasing the or removing companies from the industry if they don't maintain high standards. This is done by canceling, again, the operating authority of companies that receive an unsatisfactory safety rating. And as far as increasing the standards to remain in the industry, this is done by publishing the safety data that we just discussed. So the reasons, this is the reasoning behind that. The DOT figures that if a company will have trouble getting freight and affording their insurance, if their safety scores are too high or they get too high, then that company will set expectations and accountability for their drivers, and they will establish policies and practices that will help them get acceptable roadside inspections and keep their safety scores as low as possible. Companies that don't set up systems to control their safety scores have to constantly deal with the headaches of DOT audits, brokers backing away, and high insurance rates. All 3 of these circumstances occurring at the same time have caused many trucking companies to have to close their doors and go out of business, unfortunately. So that is the premise of the CSA system. That's how it's supposed to work, and it's really had an effect. Since it's been in effect, it really has changed the commercial transportation industry. I've seen companies go out of business as quick as 9 months. There's one company in particular that they got their DOT number and authority. They hired a couple of drivers. They got them a drug test and did the hiring routine that they're required to do. And immediately they put the drivers on the road. Immediately the drivers started racking up bad roadside inspections. So after racking up these bad roadside inspections, of course the company's safety scores immediately started going up. Before you know it, their brokers started to run away from them. Their insurance company said, hey, we got to raise your rates. And their scores were so high that the DOT said, we're going to have to come in and do a compliance investigation. The DOT came in. The company ended up with an unsatisfactory rating and a fine that they really could not afford. And as a result, this company ended up folding in less than 9 months. So this is the impact that these systems can have on companies today if they don't put policies and processes in place to ensure that they comply with the safety regulations. So in addition to the company, the motor carrier or the company being tracked, their safety history being tracked by the DOT has also implemented technology to track the safety history of drivers. So as a driver, when you go and apply for a job at any company, if they choose, they can run your name through what's called the pre-employment screening system or pre-employment screening program, or PSP. And that program will show the company every roadside inspection violation that you as a driver has accumulated over the previous 3 years. It'll show the location, um, the date, and the violations that you've accumulated over 3 years, regardless of who you work for. So new employers have access to that information. So this kind of an incentive for drivers to, not only should you, be concerned about the safety scores of the company, but as far as you having, longevity in the trucking industry as a driver, you want to consider that as well. So that's an overview of how the DOT evaluates commercial transportation companies and the consequences of not complying with the federal regulations. So hopefully this should help drivers understand, if their company is adamant about, make sure you use your ELD, make sure your ELD is turned on, and turn in the paperwork. We've asked you for this paperwork. We need you to really turn in this paperwork. The company is doing these things because they want to, operate as safely as possible and keep their scores down, which, as I've explained, can affect the company's bottom line. So, again, with this first virtual safety meeting, what I want to do is go through the driver responsibilities, commercial driver responsibilities. There's a lot of confusion about what drivers are required to do. There's a lot of new regulations. There's old regulations that there's been confusion about. I just kind of want to give an overview of all of the driver responsibilities. I'm going to go through it as quickly as possible, but I want you to understand what's required of you as a commercial driver. Future virtual safety meetings will probably not be as long as this one, and again, I'm going to try to keep this one as brief as possible, but I think it's important to discuss what drivers are required to do. So let's start with driver qualification. A trucking company or a bus company, they must compile, when they hire a new driver, they must compile a driver qualification file for the driver, and that starts with an employment application. The employment application has to be a DOT compliant employment application. A DOT compliant employment application has specific information that must be on there. The information involves the company's or the employee's work and residence history, driving experience, accident history, and drug and alcohol violation history. Your expectation as a driver is when you get that employment application, you want to make sure that you complete the entire application and sign and date it. If something on the application does not apply, you want to fill in that space, draw a line through that space, or you want to write NA in the spot to indicate that the information is non-applicable. So once the company gets your employment application signed and dated, then they have to do what's called a previous employer inquiry. So basically, the company has to contact all of the employers that you've had over the last 10 years that have employed you as a commercial driver. And they have to ask the company about your accident history, about your compliance history with the drug and alcohol regulations. There's specific things that they must ask your previous employers that employed you as a commercial driver. You must give the company consent, written consent to contact your previous employer. So there'll be a form that they want you to fill out, sign and date, so that they can meet that obligation of contacting your previous employers. You want to give them written permission, and you have the right to review and contest any information that they receive from previous employers. Let's talk about the medical certification card. A driver must make sure that your DOT physical is always valid. Make sure you have a good physical, and you must provide first of all, your state DMV with a copy of your medical card every time you get a new physical. What happens if you don't take your medical card to the DMV currently, they would downgrade your CDL. Once they downgrade your CDL because they have not received your new medical card, now you can't drive a commercial vehicle. Unfortunately, many drivers find out that their CDL has been downgraded during an inspection at the weigh station because the DMV downgraded them. They didn't get a new card. They downgraded it. They probably sent you a letter, but a lot of drivers are on the road a lot, so they may not have gotten the letter. And you won't find out your license has been downgraded until you get to the weigh station or to the inspection station. And once this happens, now the officer can cite you. There's several ways that can be cited. They can cite you for not having a valid CDL. And if they do that, now that's going to be on your company's record for 2 years. For 2 years, and it's going to be on your safety record as a driver for 3 years. So currently, with the medical card, you're supposed to carry it for at least 15 days after you get certified and take it to the DMV. The issuance of the medical card or the medical certificate by the medical examiner is supposed to end on June 22nd, 2021. At that time, there's supposed to be an electronic transmission of the physical information to the FMCSA, who will transport it to the DMV to put it on your medical card, to put it on your driving record. So that's coming in 2021. But for now, every time you get a physical, make sure you take a copy of that card to the DMV so they can get it on your driving record. There's also a certification form you're going to have to fill out when you get there. And then make sure you give a copy of that medical card to your current employer to put in your driver file. And then you want to carry it on your person for at least 15 days. The FMCSA figures that within 15 days that the DMV should have it posted on your driving record. So you're not technically allowed, or you don't have to specifically carry it on your person after 15 days if you choose not to. So things to remember: you'll be cited on the roadside if you don't have a valid medical card, and the company can be cited during a compliance investigation if the DOT comes in and starts looking at files and they see that there's not a current medical card in the file when there should be, based on the time frame, or they determine that a driver has driven or is driving without a valid physical. And that can be a critical violation against the company. So let's talk about your driver's license or your CDL. So again, as a commercial driver, you want to ensure that your driver's license is valid at all times. You know, if driving a commercial vehicle is your the way that you've chosen to make a living, then that's just part of the responsibility. You have to ensure that your license is valid. Again, you can be cited on the roadside for not having a valid license, and you can be put out of service for it. Operating a commercial vehicle on an expired license is an 8-point violation against the company, and again, it'll go on your safety record for 3 years as well. The company can also be cited for that during a compliance investigation. That'll be a critical violation if they come in and they see that a driver has driven or is driving on an expired CDL. Related to that driver's license or CDL, whenever a company hires a CDL driver, they have to perform a road test on that driver, for the company. However, the regulations give an exception if the driver is a CDL driver, which means he's been licensed to drive a vehicle, over 26,000 pounds, gross vehicle weight, gross combination weight, gross vehicle weight rating, gross combination weight rating. You'll have a CDL. If you have a CDL, you're a CDL driver, the company does not have to give you a road test for their company as long as you provide a copy of your CDL, your valid CDL, to them, which they are required to keep in your driver qualification file. So whenever you go in, you're going to have to supply, in addition to your medical card, your medical certification, you're going to have to provide a copy of your CDL as well. And that gets the company out of having to perform a road test and give you a certificate for it. So whenever your CDL is updated, again, just give them a copy of it. Every year, there's 3 things that the company has to do regarding a commercial driver's driving record. Number 1, they have to run an MVR from the DMV, your place of residence, wherever your DMV, wherever you are licensed at. They have to run an MVR from that state's DMV of your driving record every year. They also have to perform, they have to give you a form to complete. It's called the Annual Certification of Violations. When they give you that form every 12 months, you have to list every traffic conviction that you've had during the last 12 months anywhere in the country. Then you want to sign it and date it and give it back to the company. Then the company has to review your MVR, your 3-year MVR from the DMV, and review the certification of violations form that you provided to them, and they have to complete a form called the annual review of driver's record. So these 3 forms have to be in your driver file every year. So the company should give you this certification of violations to fill out each year, that you will again list every traffic conviction. That's the only thing you have to put on it, traffic convictions, nothing else, that you've had over the last 12 months. And then they'll review it and put that in your file. So that's pretty much what's required as far as driver qualifications and the driver's responsibilities with regard to qualifications. Let's talk about drug and alcohol testing. Of course, you're aware, most people are aware, you have to have a pre-employment drug test with a negative result before a company can put you behind the wheel of their commercial vehicle. They have to have that result in their hand, in their possession, before they allow you to drive or perform a safety sensitive function. You'll hear me mention safety sensitive functions a few times. Basically, a safety sensitive function includes driving a commercial motor vehicle, but it also includes other things like loading the vehicle and, anything to do with, operating that vehicle or preparing that vehicle to be driven. You can't do any of that until they've gotten a pre-employment drug test on file with a negative result on file for you. As far as, additional tests that you have to be concerned with, after you start working for the company, you have to be enrolled in a random testing pool, or the company has to conduct random testing themselves according to the regulations on all of their drivers. So there's a chance you'll get called for a random drug or alcohol test at any time. The company, if the company were to tell you to go take or if they were to send you to take a random drug or alcohol test, your responsibility as a driver is to go and take that test as soon as possible. You can't come up with excuses or reasons not to take it or that kind of thing. If you refuse to take a DOT required drug test or alcohol test, then that's treated the same as a positive test. And we'll talk about the steps that you have to take if you have a positive test. So you have to be in a random pool. You have to go get the test as soon as you can after you're notified that you need to go take a random test. A post-accident test. If you're ever involved in an accident in your commercial vehicle and there's a fatality involved, or there's a tow or an injury, transport, and you receive a citation for the accident. If there's a fatality, it doesn't matter if you receive a citation or not. But if there's an injury, transport, or a tow of any vehicle and you receive a citation for the accident as the commercial driver, then you're required to undergo a DOT post-accident drug and alcohol test. Your employer is held accountable for ensuring that this is done. So you must try to get a post-accident test when it's required within 2 hours, post-accident alcohol test within 2 hours after the accident, and a post-accident drug test within 32 hours. Now, if there's circumstances that prevent you from receiving the required post-accident DOT test, and it's a valid reason, then the company should just document why you cannot get the test as required or in the time frame that's required. The next type of drug and alcohol test you're subject to is a reasonable suspicion test. As a driver, if a driver appears to be, if they appear to a trained manager or someone at the company who's trained, if the driver appears to be showing characteristics of someone who's under the influence of drugs or alcohol, the appropriately trained employer can require the driver to receive a reasonable suspicion drug or alcohol test. So you would have to go and take that if the company asks you to do that based on behaviors that they've noticed. So commercial transportation companies are required to give a drug and alcohol policy to all CDL drivers. So your employer should provide you with this policy, and this policy should explain all of the requirements and additional drug and alcohol information that you need to be aware of when working for that company. You should sign for receipt of that policy, and the company should keep your signature on file stating that you've got a copy of the the CDL drug and alcohol policy. So let's talk about violations of the drug and alcohol regulations, because there's some new regulations in that area as well. So if a driver refuses to test or test positive for any required DOT drug test, or if a driver refuses or blows a .02 or greater blood alcohol content on a DOT required alcohol test, the driver must be removed from a safety sensitive function. I mentioned the safety sensitive functions earlier. You must be removed from a safety sensitive function, including driving of a commercial motor vehicle. So, driver that tests positive or refuse a drug test cannot drive again until he or she participates in a session with a substance abuse professional, or a SAP. They must follow the instructions of that SAP before driving again, which at a minimum, they usually ask you to take a return to duty test. You're going to have to take a return to duty test and pass that at a minimum. Even after returning to duty, after talking to the SAP, the driver will possibly have to take a series of at least 6 follow-up tests throughout the year after that. And you would have to stick to whatever that SAP recommends. If you want to continue driving at that point, you're going to have to follow the SAP's recommendation. There's going to be a paper trail to ensure that you're following the recommendations of that SAP. So, when it comes to drug alcohol tests, if you blow a .02 BAC on a DOT alcohol test, you're supposed to be removed from a safety sensitive function, including driving a commercial motor vehicle. You have to be removed for at least 24 hours. And if you blow a .04, now you have to schedule an appointment to see the SAP and go through that whole return to duty process before you can begin driving or performing a safety sensitive function again. Let's talk about a new regulation called the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. So on January 6, 2020, the FMCSA started the CDL Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. This was a game changer for the industry. I'm not sure that everyone realizes that or not, but drivers are slowly finding out already that this Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse is a big deal. So every CDL driver and every employer must register for a clearinghouse account. So if you haven't registered for a Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse account as an employer or a driver at this time, you need to go ahead and do that, because that regulation took effect on January 6th of this year, January 6th of 2020. So the clearinghouse contains information on every CDL driver that tests positive or refuses a DOT required drug or alcohol test. If a driver tests positive or refuses a drug test, or they refuse or blows a .04 or higher on a alcohol test, that information is required to be entered into the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. It's required to be entered by the SAP or by the test the individual that, or the company that administered the test. It's required to be reported by your employer if they are aware of any violations or any infractions regarding the DOT drug and alcohol violations. So that information goes into the clearinghouse, and then when a company hires a new driver, every new CDL driver that a company hires, they have to query the clearinghouse to see if there's any information in there on that new driver. So, just like the negative pre-employment drug test, now employers have to receive, or they have to query you through the clearinghouse to make sure that there's no outstanding information in that clearinghouse regarding you as a new driver. So just no way around it. It has to be done. In order for them to run your name to the clearinghouse, you have to give them consent, electronically. And for you to give them electronic consent, you have to be registered with the clearinghouse, because you have to give them electronic consent to receive information on you. If you refuse to go through this, then legally they cannot hire you as a commercial driver. So, have to query the name of new drivers, and you have to query every driver. Companies have to query every driver in their fleet every 12 months. So, once you start working for the company, sometime in the next 12 months, they're going to have to query you along with every other driver, or let's just say they have to query every driver in their fleet every 12 months to be in to make sure that they comply with the regulations. So, in the clearinghouse, let's say that they hire, or they want to hire you or hire a driver, and they see in the clearinghouse that a driver tested positive with another company, tested positive on a drug test. They cannot hire that driver unless the clearinghouse also reveals that that driver has seen a substance abuse professional. They've seen a SAP, and that they are meeting all of the requirements that has been dictated by that SAP. So if they see that, they can see that you tested positive, a driver tested positive, but in order to use you or to hire you, they have to see that you're going through the return to duty process as required. So what does this mean for commercial drivers? In the past, if a driver was sent to take a drug test or refused a drug test, they tested positive or refused a drug test, they could just quit, or they can just discontinue their application with a company. They can just go down the street or down to the next city and apply for a job with another company, and that company would never know that this driver tested positive anywhere on a drug test, or refused a drug test, or blew an 04 or higher on an alcohol test. They would never know. With this clearinghouse now, a driver cannot run from that history. If you test positive, or if you refuse, or if you blow a 04 or higher, you will not be able to drive anywhere legally unless you go through that, return to duty process, which means seeing a SAP and all of those things. And of course, there's a cost associated with that. And your new company, the regulations did not require the next company to pay for that cost. And that would be up to them. Anytime a driver has to go through the return to duty process, it's between the driver and the company who pays for it. So that's pretty much how the clearinghouse works. If you're a company or a driver that has not signed up, you need to sign up for an account with the clearinghouse. You can sign up at www.clearinghouse.fmcsa.dot.gov. So let's talk about continue on driver responsibilities as far as safe driving. So the easiest DOT safety scores for commercial drivers to control are the safety scores dealing with safe driving violations. When a DOT officer conducts a traffic stop on a commercial driver and he writes a citation for a moving violation, such as speeding, such as following too closely, or not wearing a seatbelt or talking on the cell phone, it will affect the driver's driving record. However, if that officer also conducts a roadside inspection on the driver, even if it's just a walk-around inspection or just a driver inspection, a level 3, I apologize. If they conduct an inspection in addition to that roadside inspection, in addition to that citation that they wrote, now that's when the company is going to get points against their safety score. So, if the company gets points, again, that's going to affect the company for 2 years. And then you have the issue of your driving record having that infraction on it. And those violations, those safe driving violations, for example, speeding more than 14 miles over the speed limit, that's a 10-point violation. Talking on the cell phone, that's a while you're driving, that's a 10-point violation against the company, and that's in addition to the ticket that you get as a driver. Now, if they just give you a ticket but they don't do a roadside inspection, it's just going to be on your record. The company will not be affected by your traffic violation. I might add that most state police agencies, commercial enforcement agencies, require that drivers, or I should say, some commercial commercial transportation enforcement agencies require the officer to conduct an inspection in addition to writing a violation or traffic violation against a commercial driver. I know in South Carolina that is required. So you're going to get an inspection with the traffic ticket, the speeding ticket, and that's going to go against your company. So the courts will sometimes cut a break to commercial drivers if they take the time to go to court to contest a traffic ticket. They'll cut you a break. Sometimes they're just like, okay, you make your living, driving a commercial motor vehicle. Your record's fairly clean. I'm going to cut you a break this time, and they may reduce the charge or drop the charge altogether for whatever reason. If you go to court and if you contest a traffic violation or traffic ticket in court and they reduce the charge or they dismiss the charge, then the DOT is going to come back and they're going to reduce the points against your company, and or remove the points altogether. Depending on what happens in court, they may remove the points altogether against your company. So because of all this, it's probably worth taking a chance and going to court if you get a traffic violation, because it can be beneficial for you and the company that you work for. So just let me also add, I'll also add that if you don't think you have time to go to court, there are lawyers and legal services out there that you can pay, and sometimes the fee is pretty small. You can pay them to go to court and contest a traffic violation for you, so they can go to court and have the ticket, the traffic violation dismissed or reduced, and you're going to get the benefits from that without even having to go to court. So it's worth, looking into if you, get a traffic violation. So that's all I'll say about that for now. Let's talk about hours of service or the logs. There are exceptions. Now, this is not a hours of service training video. I will create hours of service training video and other training videos in the future, but this is just kind of an overview. When it comes to hours of service, as a general rule, there are exceptions, but a driver who operates a commercial vehicle over 10,000 pounds, either as a single unit or in combination, must track their hours of service. In other words, they must keep logs for the most part. If the unit is a model year 2000 or newer and doesn't meet the exceptions granted in the regulations, it must be equipped with an electronic logging device. So you have to have an electronic logging device or an ELD for the most part if your truck is a model year 2000 or newer. And again, I'll provide comprehensive training on hours of service and ELDs in the near future. But just kind of keep that general rule in mind. If your truck is 2000 or newer, in most cases you have to have an ELD, and you must be using it. So if you are a driver that's required to use an ELD, you must ensure that it is plugged in. That's part of your responsibility. You have to make sure it's plugged in, and you have to make sure it's being used as required. The DOT can easily tell when the ELD has been unplugged, and this can result in several violations against you and against the company if they determine that your ELD was unplugged. If you unplug the ELD and move the truck, remember your mileage is being recorded also. So if you unplug the ELD and then you plug it back in, later on or the next day or whatever, there's going to be miles there that there's a report that the DOT can see the miles there that were added. while your ELD was unplugged. So they can easily tell if you do that. So make sure it's plugged in. Make sure you use it. Um, you must ensure that all of the data on the log is filled in. Any blank on the log that you don't fill in, like the trailer number, for example, the miles driven, any blank on the log is cited as a separate violation by the DOT, either on the roadside or during a compliance investigation in the company. You must not drive when you're out of hours, of course. You must sign and certify your logs within 13 days, whether it's electronic or paper logs. You have to certify them and sign them within 13 days. Submit them to the company. You cannot switch to personal conveyance when you're almost out of hours. Some drivers do that. The DOT is well aware of that. There's been cases of drivers. The DOT is looking at their logs over a certain period of time, and they notice that every time the driver gets close to being out of his or her 14 hours, they switch to personal conveyance. So there's rules involving personal conveyance. You just can't use it without cause. Basically, in general, you can use personal conveyance whenever you're using the truck for something personal and you have no responsibilities for the company. Anything that you're doing, washing the truck, getting the oil change on a Saturday, anything like that is considered on duty. You can't do that stuff when and say it's personal conveyance. An example of personal conveyance is if you're somewhere and you want to go get something to eat. That's the most common example. You don't have your car. The only thing you have is your truck. Excuse me. You can use the truck to go get something to eat when you're shut down at a hotel or something. You can put that on personal conveyance and that kind of thing. So there are rules to that. We'll discuss that as well in future videos. But you have to be careful about personal conveyance. Because it can and has gotten drivers and companies in a lot of trouble since the implementation of the ELD requirement. So you must log your pre-trip as on duty not driving, and that's in addition to completing the DVIR we're going to talk about. You must log your fuel stops as on duty not driving. Make sure you log your fuel stops on your ELD or on your log. You must submit supporting documents such as fuel receipts, toll receipts, and that kind of thing to the company. The company is required to keep your logs and supporting documents for a minimum of 6 months. That's a DOT requirement. When the DOT conducts a compliance investigation, they're going to review a sample of driver's logs and supporting documents going back as far as 6 months. They will usually look at 30 days worth of logs for each driver during a compliance review, each driver in their sample. They will cite all the violations that they see, including missing logs. If you work if you work 30 days, but you only drove, if you only worked 3 days during that month, then your ELD needs to show 27 days of off duty for that month. They're going to cite 11-hour, 14-hour, 60 and 70-hour rule violations. They're going to cite 30-minute break violations that they find. Form and manner violation. Again, any missing data on the log is considered a form and manner violation. And they're going to compare your supporting documents, like your fuel receipts, to the log to determine false log. That's how they check for false logs. If your logs show that you were in Dallas at noon on February 23rd, but there's a fuel receipt in your package that shows that you fueled up in Houston at 11:45 a.m. on February 23rd. That investigator is going to cite a false log on February 23rd. Your fuel receipt shows that you were doing something or you were somewhere that's different than what your log shows. Likewise, if your log shows that you were off duty all day on a Saturday, but the company's fuel card report, they can get a fuel card report for the company and show that you used the credit card to get fuel somewhere. Your log shows you were off all day on Saturday, but the company's fuel report shows that you fueled up. Then that's a false log. You were not off. If you took the truck somewhere to fuel it up, then you should have logged on duty. You should have logged the driving time. You should have logged the on duty time. So that's considered a false log. So that's how they check for that. A false log cited on the roadside is a 7-point violation against the company. This will affect the company's safety score for 2 years, and it'll be on your driver's, on the driver's PSP report for 3 years. So false logs discovered um, by the DOT during compliance investigations are considered critical violations. And basically, what that means is that it will affect the company's overall safety rating, and the company can get a significant fine for that. Let's talk about ELD requirements during a roadside inspection. In addition to checking for all of the hours of service rules, like the 14-hour rule and all of that, they're going to check for your ELD, certain things regarding the ELD that they can cite you for. Now, these are usually, uh, lower points, 1 point violations, but a lot of companies, these will add up. For example, a portable ELD must be mounted in a fixed position and visible to the driver when he's in the seated position, seated in the driving position. If your ELD is not mounted, if it's laying on the seat or on the dashboard or whatever, that's a violation. You must have an information packet in the vehicle that contains a user manual for the ELD. Not having a user's manual is a violation. And you have to have instructions for transferring the data. That can be included in the user's manual, but you have to have instructions for transferring the data to a roadside officer. Got to be written instructions for that in the truck. There must be written procedures for what to do if the ELD malfunctions. The company can write that up, but there has to be written instructions for what you as a driver should do if the ELD malfunctions. And again, during the hours of service training that I'll provide later, we'll talk about the requirements for a malfunctioning ELD. Real quickly, what you're gonna have to do, you're gonna have to report it to the company. You're gonna have to report it to the vendor, and you're gonna have to use your paper logs up to 8 days. You can use paper logs. If you need to do that more than 8 days, there's procedures for that as well. But in an overview, that's what you have to do if the ELD malfunction. And that leads to the last item that they're going to check for regarding your ELDs, which is they're going to check to see that you have 8 days worth of blank paper logs to use at all times. You have to have blank paper logs in your truck, 8 days worth to use in case your ELD malfunctions. All right. So that covers hours of service and ELDs. That's an overview, with regard to driver responsibilities. And now the last section, I think, last section we want to talk about is vehicle maintenance responsibilities with regard to the driver. One important thing you want to make sure is that you have an annual inspection, a periodic inspection, also known as a federal inspection, on your tractor and trailer at all times. You have to get a federal inspection by a qualified mechanic or inspector every 12 months. You have to, give a copy of that inspection report to your company. They have to keep it on file for 14 months. So you have to make sure the annual inspection is good on the tractor and trailer at all times. That's a critical violation during a compliance investigation, and it will result in points on the roadside inspection if you don't have that annual inspection. DVIRs, as a driver, you are required to conduct a pre-trip inspection and a post-trip inspection on your vehicle each day. The regulations state that any maintenance discrepancies with your vehicle that you discover or you are informed of should be recorded on a DVIR, or a driver vehicle inspection report, for that day. So you should ensure that any maintenance issues that can affect the safe operation of that vehicle is corrected before you drive it. Other violations or discrepancies have to be repaired as soon as possible. DVIR should be submitted to the company, and the company should ensure that all maintenance discrepancies are corrected, and they must keep the DVIR on file for at least 90 days, whether it's electronic through your ELD. Most ELDs have a function to conduct or to complete the DVIR, but a lot of companies get violations for that during compliance investigations. Drivers are not conducting the DVIR, not completing DVIRs when they're required to. You want to do that inspection every day. But you only have to, again, complete the DVIR when you find a discrepancy with maintenance, or if any time during that day someone tells you, that someone is usually a roadside inspector, you know, they tell you about a maintenance discrepancy on the vehicle. That has to be on your DVIR that you submit to the company. So along those lines, roadside inspections, completing the pre-trip, and the post-trip as required should go a long way towards preventing maintenance violations during roadside inspections. It's common sense that the older the vehicle, the more or the more careful you're going to have to be in ensuring in conducting those inspections, and it's probably going to require more maintenance and that kind of thing. There's no way around that. Older vehicles require more maintenance and more thorough inspections in order to prevent violations on the roadside. I'll create a video in the near future as well on the inspection process for drivers. Hopefully that'll help understand the inspection process, how you evaluate it, and how things affects you as a driver and affects the company during roadside inspections. So let's see. During the roadside inspections, the most common violations are worn or damaged tires, brakes are out of service, inoperable lights, and oil, grease, and air leaks. Those are the most common things cited during roadside inspections. Each of the violations in those areas carry, different levels of as far as the points, between 1 and 10, it varies depending on what the violation is. These items should be checked during the pre-trip inspection each day, along with the horn, the wipers, the windshield, the fire extinguisher. You make sure you have 3 safety triangles. The fifth wheel should be checked. The condition of it, condition of your hoses, reflective tape on the truck, load securement. All of these things should be checked, because these are the things that the roadside inspector will be checking and writing violations on. So again, if you check these things on a regular basis as required, it'll cut down on violations that you receive at the weigh station, and cut down on points going against the company's maintenance safety score, and causing issues for you as a driver. So if your vehicle is placed out of service for a maintenance issue, you cannot leave the inspection station, of course, until it is repaired. And all other discrepancies cited should be corrected before the vehicle is dispatched. So the vehicle maintenance paperwork. As a commercial driver, you must submit copies of all roadside inspections to your employer. You have to give them copies of that roadside inspection, because they're required by the DOT to keep those roadside inspections on file for 12 months. The DOT, when they come in to your company or contact your company to do a safety investigation, they know all the roadside inspections that the companies have. They know the drivers that have had inspections. They know the vehicles that have had inspections under the company's DOT number. Again, they know because the states are required to upload those inspections to the DOT. So they know. They'll come in and they'll look back 12 months, and they'll want to see copies of all the roadside inspections that your drivers, that the company's drivers and vehicles have had. And they'll write a violation for everyone that they can't produce. And it has to be the original inspection that was signed by the driver, or a copy of the original. It's nothing, in other words, they can't go online. You can't go online and download a copy from any other source. It has to be the original that was signed by the driver, or a copy of the original. So they'll verify this. Regulation requires that any violation cited by an inspector during a roadside inspection also be noted on the driver's DVIR. As I mentioned, when you do that DVIR at the end of the day, not only are you supposed to put things that you found during your pre-trip or post-trip, but you're supposed to put any violations that you're informed of, any maintenance issues that you're informed of by a roadside inspector. So in other words, if a roadside inspector writes a violation against you for having a bad tire on your truck and an inoperable tail light, then your DVIR for that day that you submit to the company has to include a worn tire, and an inoperable tail light, because that inspector told you about that, and the regulation says the regulations say that has to go on your DVIR. Okay, so maintenance status record. We're getting close to the end here. The maintenance status record must be maintained for every truck, tractor, trailer, and passenger vehicle. Maintenance status record basically lists it's a record that lists every maintenance process, every inspection, and every repair conducted on the vehicle, including the date and the mileage. You have to keep track of that. There has to be a log or something that records all maintenance, inspections, and repairs on every tractor, every truck, every trailer, and every passenger vehicle. There should also be a schedule that shows when the next oil change or preventive maintenance is due. There has to be some kind of schedule. The DOT will cite the company if there's not. So that schedule has to say next oil change is due at this mileage or is due on this date. All of the receipts and invoices for maintenance, repairs, and inspections must be retained on file for at least a year. For anything, when you go through a roadside inspection, you have to get something repaired. When you get your annual inspection, whenever you have an oil change or whatever, you have to keep the receipts and the receipts and the maintenance. The receipts and the invoices for that. The DOT requires, and they'll ask to see it. So let's go ahead and wrap this safety meeting up. In conclusion, I hope that this has been informative and it has cleared up any confusion about DOT safety scores and compliance. Any questions can be directed to me at Kevin at CTSA-safety.com, or if you or your employer are members of the Compliance Hub by CTSA, all the forms, or I should say in addition to any questions, you can get all of the forms that are required by the DOT off of the Compliance Hub by CTSA website if you are a member of that website. That's a low-cost membership, annual membership, and in addition to having all of the requirements, the DOT requirements, in addition to listing the IFTA requirements, UCR requirements, IRP requirements, copies of the regulations, explanations, videos, all of that is on that Compliance Hub for anybody who wants to become a member of that. Again, it's a low-cost membership. Right now it's $27 a year. If you want to sign up for that, you can become a member of the Compliance Hub at www.ctsacompliancehub.com, and you'll receive all of that training, all of the documents you're required to have, and you'll get regular updates of what's going on with the DOT and DOT requirements and that kind of thing. In addition, you can get regular updates by following me on Twitter at Kevin Morrison, at Kevin CTSA Safety, and I will be active on Twitter, providing updates and all of the information that will help you stay compliant, lower your scores, get better insurance rates, and all of that. So I welcome you to follow me on Twitter as well. And that concludes this safety meeting. I appreciate you watching and look forward to bringing you the next safety meeting within the next 30 days. Thanks.